Hello, companies. This is our introduction to V programming. I am Evan Stosic.
I'm Andy Liu.
I'm Kenneth Shu.
And I'm Anj.
So V programming is a statically typed compiling programming language designed for building maintainable software. It's very similar to Go, so if you already know Go, then you should know about 80% of V already. The language is very simple. It only has about an hour of documentation and promotes writing simple and clear code with minimal abstraction. The creator is Alexander Medvednikov. He is from Amsterdam, North Holland, Netherlands. He studied at the University of Groningen and worked on the language since 2019. So how you install V is actually very simple. You just clone the GitHub repository and then you cd into the folder and you make the V compiler and then you're done. Some notable features of V are that it has very innovative memory management. About 90% to 100% of the objects are freed by V because it inserts free calls during the compilation. You can translate your entire C project into V, and V has a lot of safety features such as it has no null, no global variables, and no undefined variables.
Here you can see how the simple program Hello World is coded in V and in C. The main differences in V is that you don't need to include the function and you don't need to include a main function. You also don't need to have the hashtag, the include statement, and that just makes the code much simpler. The current usage, so V currently, the language is written in V itself, and Vinex, it's a open source operating system that runs Bash, GCC, and V. And Volt is another one. It's a native desktop client that you can use for things like Slack, Skype, Telegram, Twitch, etc. So these are some variables in V. So when you declare or initialize a variable, you do it with a semicolon followed by an equal to sign. The type of any of the variables is inferred from the value on the right hand side, so you don't have to state the type every time you create a variable. And anytime you want to change the value of your variable, you just declare it with MUT, and then you use the equal to sign and then change it. These are some of the primitive types in the V programming language. This is comparable to Java. So as you can see, Java has 8 primitive types: Boolean, byte, character, short, int, long, float, and double. So one of the primitive types, strings. So strings in V are stored a little bit differently than other languages like C. So in V, they're stored as a read-only array of bytes, and that means that they're immutable. So you're not able to access one single element of the character array. This is different from C++, where you can mutate the elements of the string, because strings in C++ are stored as a character array. Arrays are pretty much the same across the board. You can see this is how you initialize an array. You write MUT, and then this is an array of numbers 1, 2, and 3, and you just put the semicolon and equal to sign, and the V programming language infers the type of the variable.
So this is an example of a statement for expressions of ifs and ors. In this case, you can see that braces are used to determine what is in a loop. It's similar for users who use Java, but it doesn't use parentheses. It's implied by the language.
Printing in V is pretty simple. To define a print value for any sort of class that you make, you just have to define a str method. And then when using any sort of print function, V will automatically use that .str method to print whatever values you want. And for any sort of functions, the type comes after the argument name, which is different than a lot of other languages that you might see. And functions are automatically set to private. So in order to set them to something else, you have to use a keyword, for instance, PUB, like we have here. And then if you want to modify any function arguments, you have to use the keyword MUT, which we also mentioned earlier. and arguments can be passed as references or values. V actually defines how it's passed during the compilation time, so that it takes care of that as well.
So now we have to talk about where we have to go for the V language. Because currently, it's still in pre-alpha. It's still very basic, and most of the features still work in progress. V originally is advertised to be very efficient with about 70 kilobytes, but it's still in the 400 millibytes. And there's still problems with stability within the language itself. It's currently buggy, and one of the biggest problems it has is it requires perfect code. For example, if you use an unused variable and unused import, it completely makes your code fail regardless. And the biggest downside for V is that it's still a small community working on improvements for language.